This is October 20, 2006. We're doing another oral history interview for the archives here at UAH. I'm Charles Lundquist, and our interviewee today is Jim Splawn. Jim, it's good to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck. It's good to be here. Good to be here. I think this is a great exercise that you guys are documenting.
Well, thank you. We usually start out by letting the interviewee tell a little bit about their youth, where they came from, where they got educated, and how they got into the space program. Can you do that for us?
Absolutely. Well, I was born in Kentucky. I was raised in Tennessee, Chattanooga as my home. I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, so I was educated formally in Georgia, but all of my professional career has been in Alabama. So when I came out of Georgia Tech, I went to work in Decatur, which is 25 miles from here, and that was in the late 50s. And by 61, I had heard all of these wonderful comments about going to the moon, the space program. So I told my wife, we'd just had a child born on May 29th, but on June 1, I fulfilled a comment that I had made to my wife that I've just got to be involved with that. So fortunately, I was able to be employed by NASA on June 1 of 1961 and put in a full retirement for the government service.
Very good. Well, where did you start out then in NASA?
Well, when I came to Marshall Space Flight Center, one of the first things I remember about it is that we started at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And if you went home before 6 p.m., people thought there was a little something wrong with you. You know, why can you not complete your day? Why can you not complete your day? But I went to work in the manufacturing engineering lab. I think when I first got there in 61, it was known as the Fab Lab, Fabrication Lab. Then we got a sophisticated name called manufacturing engineering. And I was in the resources management office at that point in time. So in the Fab Lab, we were evaluating funding. We were evaluating costs like materials, labor charges, whatever it took to do business in that arena, in that environment, is what we were interested in doing. So that led into some very interesting aspects, though. The NASA at that point in time was a terrific environment for young engineers to be able to explore and even exploit the ideas that they may have. And so during the time that I was in the Fab Lab, there were some of us in about 62, 63 that started playing with the ideas stimulated by a spacewalk off of the Gemini program, where we talked about, okay, we're in the Fab Lab. Man is going to do work in space, but watching the EVA activity, how is a crewman going to stay in a spot and do physical work? Well, he's got to be restrained by some technique. The tools that he works with, like we work in the shops with, those tools will have to be restrained likewise so that they don't float off and we end up a tool short for completing a job. So we started playing with those ideas, and then that led to, how are you going to train? How are you going to simulate the environment of weightlessness for the flight crew training? So we sat many hours at lunchtime, because all of us brought our lunches.
Who were some of the other people involved with you?
Charlie Cooper ended up being one of our branch chiefs. Don Neville ended up being in charge of all of our pressure suits. Charlie Torstensen, Bill Cruz, oh gee whiz, Jim Martin.
So you had quite a team sitting around planning.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. But early on, it was about 3 or 4 of us, and that was Charlie Cooper, Charlie Torstensons, Bill Cruz, and myself, and Charlie Stocks. And so we talked about how in the world can we come up with a medium whereby we could simulate weightlessness. And one day at lunch, one of the guys says, did you know, have you ever watched your wife when she was swimming underwater? We said, yeah, all the time. They said, no. Did you ever notice how her hair just free floats in the water? And we said, hey, that may be a key. So we started playing with that idea about becoming neutrally buoyant in water. So if you put a body in the water, we wanted it to neither be submerged nor float. We wanted it to stay neutrally buoyant. And so we started playing with that idea. Then we said, okay, now we've got to find an area where we can start. Well, again, being in the Fab Lab, there was an explosive forming pit out in a field. It was 8 feet in diameter and 8 feet deep and filled with water. And there was tooling down inside that pit that was the shape of a die, and that was used to form the bulkheads or the cap ends of fuel tanks or liquid oxygen tanks. And those domes were put together by slices. We called them orange peel slices. And so they would take that die and they'd put a straight piece of metal in front of it. They'd discharge an explosive here, and it would blow that piece of metal against that die, and we had no materials workings of hardness, of heat generation, that kind of thing. And then we simply trimmed the edges and then put those individual gore sections together, and we had the dome. So we said, why can we not, because this particular pit had been abandoned because they had gone to a larger 25-foot diameter area for working, we said, let's go into that small pit and see if we can start doing something. So we started playing around, and this was obviously just in swim trunks with a mask, but we could prove out that we could make tools neutrally buoyant. So we could take some craftsman tools, and by putting on a little bit of flotation to counterbalance the weight of the tool itself, we sort of started playing with the idea. Well, that obviously expanded into, this is not big enough. We've got to go to a larger tank. Well, now, by this point in time, the 25-foot diameter tank that was 15 feet deep had been abandoned. They had a nice growth of algae in that pit. It was close to a steam line that was used for heating of some of the Marshall buildings. So we were able to simply tap into that steam line, heat the water. We found an interstage for Saturn that had been damaged by a forklift down at the Cape. And so we brought that 33-foot diameter interstage in, and that was our above the ground sidewalls for the area. We got the shop to take some, I guess it was probably 2-inch pipe, weld it together and make us a covering to go over that. Then we got the materials shop to make us a canvas. Wasn't really canvas, I guess it was some form of fiberglass because it was clear.
Fabric anyway.
Yeah, some fabric to go across the top. And so now we had us a bigger tank going. We bought Sears and Roebuck swimming pool filters. We bought our first scuba tanks, and here we were in business. So that's the way we got started. And then ultimately, of course, we went to what we affectionately refer to as the big tank.
Well, how did that come about? I'm sure that's a good story how it happened.
Well, our belief was, let's make sure we've got a cat in the bag before we dump it out. And so while we were at the 25-foot diameter tank, we had done this, and this was in addition to our regular job. So lots of times we would work after hours and try to perfect the principles that we thought would work. Well, after we had done that for a while, we said we need to have some pressure suits. So we said, okay, we'll contact Houston. So we worked through some avenues and went to Houston, and they said no pressure suits are available. The flight crew, they obviously have training suits, they have flight suits, and there are no suits available to come to Marshall. So Charlie Cooper and myself flew to San Diego to the Naval Center, Naval Base out there, and they fitted us for 4 high-altitude flying suits. They took us out to a swimming pool and said, if you're going to work in water in these pressure suits, you need to understand the safety procedures of how to get the helmet off of the suit itself so that you can get air, so that you can retain breathing. And so we went through all those procedures, and we flew home with 4 pressure suits contained in very large suitcases. We checked them at the airport just like baggage and brought them home. Now, in the meantime, we had found out that Werner von Braun was a scuba diver. We said, aha, this may be our key. So when we thought we had that cat in the bag, we had the principles of how to function in pressure suits underwater, because that's the end use that the flight crew will have. We said, let's invite Dr. von Braun down and expose him to what we've got. So we brought him down. We had swimming trunks and mask that would fit him.
About when was that, time-wise?
This was 65, 66 kind of time frame, right. 64, 65.
All right.
And so we invited Dr. von Braun, and he came and he looked at what we had, and obviously it was quite a jury rig, but it worked. We had a lot of instrumentation to monitor not only our heart rates, but we could monitor the kind of torques we could exert through some of this, because Fab Lab had an electrical segment, and some of those guys were very interested in what we're doing.
Yeah, Fab Lab could build anything that anybody wanted.
That's just about the truth. Anything, including space missiles.
Right.
So when von Braun came, we put him through the paces, and he came back to the surface. He pulled his mask off, and he says, yeah, this is good. Keep going, keep going. So that was our license. That's what we had hoped to hear. So we had dumped the cat out of the bag, and now we thought we had endorsement. So you asked then about the large tank. The large tank design began in about, again, the 65 or 66 time frame. The talk at this time headed toward Skylab. Skylab was still just in the talking phase, and I'm not real sure the date when Skylab was really approved, but it was probably late 60s, 67 or 8 would be my guess. So we wanted to design a tank that would function appropriately for us, full-scale model of hardware that the flight crew would have to be working on. So that drove the design. So we ended up with a tank 75 feet in diameter. It was 40 feet deep, had 1,300,000 gallons of water in it. All of this was designed in-house. All of the piping for plumbing systems, water circulation, etc. All the electrical systems were designed and built in-house. The steel for the tank proper was purchased, but it was welded together by people out of our test lab. Fritz Vandersee was the guy, I believe, that ran the crew at that point.
All right.
So he and his crew welded the tank together. It was equipped with large portholes to where you could stand on several platforms exterior to the tank and watch through the portholes from all the different angles about what was being performed. We had underwater TV cameras, underwater communications, and so it took quite some time to build that, but by about 69 or early 70, we were in business. So now all of the procedures had to be written, how you were to conduct a test, certainly what were your safety precautions. The medical center worked very closely with us. Dr. Splawn was our prime doctor at that point in time. And so we covered not only the medical aspects, but all of the safety aspects. How many scuba divers did we have to have with each test subject, whether it's an astronaut or not? Each test subject that's underwater required 2 safety divers in scuba gear. And so they trained and trained and trained about how to get the helmet off, how to get an auxiliary supply of air into the test subject's mouth for continued breathing. And each test subject had to learn how to breathe without holding your nose, you know, without getting strangled in the medium you were in. So we were equipped with a hyperbaric chamber. This was the only hyperbaric chamber for the treatment of diving type accidents, where you have the bends is the common name for it. It's actually a bubble of air that is generated within your system if you've been down to a depth and then you come up too fast to where your body cannot reabsorb that air bubble. Then that's where that air bubble will circulate through your body and eventually find some fork that it can go down neither avenue. So
was that chamber built, or did you get a commercial one?
We bought a commercial one, but again, it was built to our specs because we wanted to make sure that we had portholes again to where we could see inside. It was a double chamber, so that if you were treating somebody in the furthest chamber in, then you could lock in and out doctors, technicians, food, water, whatever amenities you needed. So it was a very well equipped facility. Had an elevator that served from the ground floor to the top deck, 40 feet up, because you came to that top deck dressed in a pressure suit. You did not have the helmet on yet. You did not have the gloves on yet, but otherwise you were equipped to go into the water and have the weight harness placed upon your body, so that, as we called it, we would trim you out, such that you could lay horizontal, you could lay on your right side, your left side, you could be on your head, you could be up straight, and in all of those positions you did not have a preferred position that you would rotate back to. So the procedures all had to be worked out, and we must have done a pretty good job with all of that, because we've never had an accident.
Did you ever use the hyperbaric chamber? Yes,
and it was for the treatment of the brother of one of our senators at that point in time.
Really?
Ronnie Flippo, Senator Ronnie Flippo, was from over in the Tri-Cities area. And his brother, Claude, was a hard hat diver for TVA. And Claude had been on a hard hat dive at that dam, which is, of course, a very deep dam up in the mountains. I imagine he'd been down some 150, 175 feet welding on one of the chains that controls the floodgates.
This was Fontana Dam?
Up at Fontana Dam in North Carolina, very close to the Tennessee line. Well, while the diver was down, rough weather blew in, and so the surface tenders needed to get him back to the surface, and before they ran into some problems there. And so anyway, they brought him back through the procedures, but I imagine they must have hurried one or two of the required stops to give your body time to circulate the blood and help absorb the little bubbles of oxygen that's in your bloodstream. So anyway, by the time they got him to the surface, he was having extreme symptoms of difficulty with pain, mobility difficulties, some disorientation, etc. So they brought him out of the Fontana Dam area into Knoxville, Tennessee, to a hospital there, and they said, you know, obviously what you need is a hyperbaric chamber. And so the medical profession had gotten the knowledge distributed that in Huntsville we now had a hyperbaric chamber. So we got the hospital had called into NASA, and NASA had routed them to Dr. Braun's secretary, Bonnie Holmes. Bonnie called us and said, "I've just gotten a phone call. They have a hard hat diver that has a problem, and they're en route to Huntsville." So they flew Claude into the Redstone airstrip in a low-flying aircraft. We had an ambulance there waiting on him. We had our own med center people there. We had our hyperbaric chamber people there. So we were all set and put him immediately in the chamber. We treated him for about 3 days. So we made several dives with him down to depths that should have dissolved that bubble. And we did dissolve the bubble. But in the meantime, some of the tissues and nerve endings had ceased to function. So he actually left our facility in a wheelchair, but in monitoring his progress through months following, he did get to walk again with the use of a cane, but the lower portion of his body was damaged from that process. But we did what we could do. This is a government service to the community.
You saved his life, probably.
Yeah, yes, we very definitely saved his life. So Ronnie Flippo, our congressman, I still see him frequently, and he always remembers exactly what we did for he and his family, because, you know, Ronnie and Claude's mom and dad and brothers and sisters, they all came to our building through the weekend. We had food for them there and all of that, you know, so they were very appreciative of how we were able to help in that kind of situation.
Well, getting back to the use of the tank for NASA, what were some of the highlights of things that were done in the tank?
Well, there were a lot of highlights. I probably should address first the relationship with our sister NASA center down at Houston, JSC.
I'm sure that's an interesting interface.
Well, it was a little touchy because Marshall certainly was not in the astronaut training business. But the reason Marshall had built the tank was to be able to develop appropriate hardware and experiments and how to service those experiments while we were in space, because some of them had to have resupply, like film that goes into cameras, those kind of things, and some of those would require an EVA. So we needed to make our plans for the astronauts really to be able to do their job. Well, Houston didn't necessarily see it that way. They thought that we were trying to sort of get into their corn crib, but the way it worked out was very good. The flight crewmen that came to Huntsville for specific training on Skylab, and that was 3 flight crews of 3 on each flight, and 2 backup crews, which was 6. So we trained 15 different astronauts for the Skylab missions. The flight crew are tremendous people. we grew to appreciate tremendously their abilities, their intellect, their physical skills, their fun side, as well as their serious side. I know Pete Conrad. Pete Conrad, of course, was on the first crew that helped us salvage Skylab. And Pete was about 5'7" or 5'8", had a vocabulary that included a lot of words that you don't normally use. He was just
you need not repeat them here.
I shall not. But he was just a fun guy to be around. But anytime he would come to the neutral buoyancy, he'd get dressed out in his pressure suit, go down to get inside the elevator, and we had some tall structural members that were there, and we had cross ties that were like tie rods in between some of those. And Pete would always grab those rods, and he'd shake them, and they would bang against each other, and they would rattle all the way up. So we always knew when Pete was fixing to come to the top deck. So Rusty Swikert was his running mate on the first Skylab mission. And so we did a lot of intensive training for those guys for that mission. We found pretty soon that at Marshall, we were running out of scuba divers. We trained some that just had volunteered, said, hey, we hear what you're doing. We'd be interested in performing in that capacity. And so we had a guy in Marshall that named Joe Dabbs that was a certified instructor for scuba. And so we got him to train these other scuba divers that we could use. But pretty soon we ran out of the volunteerism because of the demands on these guys and their regular job. This was not their full-time job. So we had to pick and choose and even schedule tests when we could get divers. So we went to the Navy and requested 10 Navy divers. And so after considerable discussion, the Navy agreed and sent us 10 SEALs. The Navy SEALs are very much man of all trades. They can jump out of aircraft, so they knew how to parachute. They knew how to handle themselves on the ground, so they'd make good Army foot soldiers and Marine foot soldiers. They certainly were skilled in scuba. They knew how to protect themselves, and they knew how to get classified jobs done in very, very unusual circumstances. Mm-hmm. So obviously they were interesting people, but we got 10 of them. And I'm not sure that Huntsville was quite ready for those 10 Navy divers to come to town, because they did cause a ruckus in a few areas. But nevertheless, they did us a tremendous job. They did us a tremendous job. Again, because of their comfort in the underwater environment. We had a meeting every morning at 7 o'clock and laid out the task for the day, whether that be changing out hardware that goes into the tank or whether it be some maintenance problem, whatever. They were always Johnny on the spot and could really get the job done. Now that brings up another subject that I just mentioned, and that is the hardware that goes into the tank. Obviously it had to be constructed such that we could see visually via the TV cameras into the confinement inside of what was to be their Skylab habitat. And so we used open wire mesh that was made in our fab shop, painted in our paint shop. And so all the safety precautions with the sharp edges, sharp corners, etc., we had to protect against that because we did not want to snag a pressure suit and not only damage the pressure suit, but also for the safety of the flight crew. But the hardware well, the turnaround time in the Fab Lab shops was tremendous. They made everything from handrails to very complicated enclosures that would simulate the flight experiments.
Who was the director of Fab Lab in this period?
Eisenhart. What was his first name? Eisenhart. Sorry, I don't remember.
All right.
But Eisenhart ran the shops per se, and who was the director of Fab Lab proper was Werner Kurs, K-U-E-R-S, Werner Kurs, followed by...
who was also a very accomplished musician.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. And Dr. Matt Siebel followed in behind Dr. Kurs. So I think Dr. Kurs is now deceased, of course,
yes,
along with Eisenhart and so many of our other German friends. I cannot say enough about the service that we got out of our shop people. They not only gave us good skill, but they gave us some good designs. When we would take a design to them, and our engineering staff was helping to design a lot of this hardware, the shop people would say, that's going to be a problem. Why can we not do it this way? And so their skill very much reinforced the missions that we had and what we were doing. So the teamwork between all of the Marshall people, whether it was P&VE lab, astronautics lab, test lab, Fab Lab, certainly the front offices, all of this just worked together tremendously as a team. And I must include the Med Center too, because every time we had an astronaut in the water, we had a doctor sitting deck side.
At some time, I believe you had to tell headquarters about the existence of this facility, and I've heard a few tales about that. Can you repeat that?
Well, yes. Money at that point in time, though it was plentiful in a lot of arenas, because the demands of the flight hardware and the engineering and the testing going on for going to the moon was very demanding. But some of the facilities money was very tight. And so that's why we decided to design and build basically in-house. And so once that large tank was built and we were ready to really kick off the training aspects, a tool tag, T-O-O-L, a tool tag, which is about as big as the first joint on your finger with numbers on it, was attached to the side of that large tank.
So it was a tool.
It was a tool, and it was a tool for use for flight experiments, for training, for working out fundamental procedures of how to get man from point A to point B. So it was a tool. That was not a misnomer. But von Braun caught some heat. Chauncey Huth and some of them, Davis Foxworthy in our facilities arena, they caught some heat. But I remember that I happened to be on the top deck one day, and because it was summertime and we had no air conditioning in the building, the big doors on the front side of the building were open. But I heard a car pull into the front of the building, and back then we had the white vehicles and they had the NASA Blue Ball
I remember
insignia on it. So I heard the car drive in, so I looked over the edge and I saw 4 doors open, and I saw guys dressed as we are in suits and ties, and some I knew and some I did not know. And they came over, and I believe it was Davis Foxworthy pointed up to that tool tag and said, "This is a tool." Right there is the tag number. And so come to find out later, they were guys from headquarters running an investigation.
I see.
So, but anyway, we had the tank. Von Braun had said that's the way to go. We will build it. They will not make us disassemble it, even if they disagree that it's a tool. So we had the tank, and we used it for many years, all the way up through Hubble telescope, training aspects, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, when you finished working with the tank, what happened next in your career?
Well, I moved to the Space Shuttle and got involved with the Space Shuttle main engine, SSME. Bob Thompson, of course, was in P&BE lab, and during Skylab, he ran what we termed dry simulation, and we in neutral buoyancy ran wet simulation. But our hardware was configured very much the same. So the flight crew, as well as working engineers, could go into the dry simulation and figure out where to put things, and then we could similarly mount that underwater in our wet environment. But Bob Thompson was moved, and that's before he became known as JR. So Bob Thompson was moved into the position of being the program manager for the Space Shuttle main engine. And so I'd gotten a call from him then that said, you know, I'd like for you to go to work on SSME. And I said, well, Bob, I'm not a propulsion guy necessarily. And he said, well, you weren't necessarily a simulation guy either. So I said, okay, I got your point. So anyway, I ended up going there. Had a fun career there. Went to Rocketdyne facility in California. That's where the engines were being made. The Space Shuttle main engine was being made. Has had all the engines for the Saturn 1, 1B, Saturn 5 vehicles. And so that was a good 3 years there as we were building our first Space Shuttle main engine. And then after coming back to Huntsville.
So you were there 3 years?
I was in California for 3 years, and then came back to the program office here in Huntsville. So that was a fun career.
And what happened next then?
Well, sort of what happened next is I retired.
You retired. When did you retire?
I retired in '84. And if you run your math, from 61 to 84 doesn't get you to 30 years. But I had co-opted while at Georgia Tech with a government agency known as TVA.
Ah, yes.
So I got, and a co-op program is 5-year duration. So I got some experience time-wise, government-wise, and tenure-wise through that avenue, and then spent some time in the Army. So I ended up with full 30 years.
What did you do in the Army?
What did I do in the Army? I really did very little except go through basic training. Because at that point in my career, which was very soon after I got out of Georgia Tech, I was working for a defense supporting industry in Decatur, because we were making shell casings and that kind of thing out of copper, and et cetera, et cetera.
This was the Korean War period?
That's correct. And because I had the engineering degree and I was working at a defense supporting industry, I put in 6 months on active duty, and then came out and spent the rest of my time in reserves. In reserves, yeah.
Well, what did you do after you retired?
Well, after I retired, I went into business for myself for about 4.5 years. I wanted to do something totally different than what I had done in NASA, so I went into the construction business. Started an electrical contracting company. But interesting, I found myself bidding on jobs on post on Redstone Arsenal. And whenever we had our disastrous flight, where our wiring was, on that frosty morning when we launched, we built or modified a test stand to test that the O-ring surface on that Y joint. Well, I bid and got that job for the electrical. So I guess that sort of helped turn me back to, okay, I have not diluted my NASA blood, my government blood, to the point that I really want to get out of this kind of business. So I stayed very close to NASA and to the Army here on post. And then I had a chance to sell the company after about 4.5 years. So I sold the company, and now I'm with Boeing. So I've had a wonderful career now with Boeing, working missile defense, some now on homeland defense. And so trying to take some of those technologies that have evolved over the years and now using it for our homeland defense.
You've been involved with the NASA Retiree Association. I believe you're now the president, or whatever the right term is of that. Can you say a few words about it? Well,
you can tell how hard up they were to try to find somebody to be their president, but that is true. So we meet once a quarter. Usually have somewhere between 75 and 100 retirees and spouses that will come to our meetings. We have a variety of programs. We are currently pursuing some potentials back with Marshall, where they have indicated that as they now make preparations to return to the moon and on to Mars, that some of our retirees just might have some skills and abilities that they could use. So we are trying to work some of those details now to be able to call on that experience base of many years ago. A great pool of resources, incidentally.
Well, that's surely a very good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
The young folks at Marshall, I'm sure, appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave for the record? Did you have a good career?
I've had a fantastic career. I've said many times I just was lucky enough to be at the right spot at the right time. Not only to get involved with NASA and the space program, but also with the Army now, in working with Boeing. We do a lot of work with the Army and the Air Force and the Navy on defense systems. And so I have had two superb careers. Huntsville was a great place to raise a family. My kids, 3 of them, have fond memories of Huntsville. They grew up understanding space, supporting space today, and now we've got 8 grandkids that are coming on, and we don't know where they may end up, but I guarantee you they'll be exposed to a bunch of space stories.
Well, we truly thank you for coming in today. And
glad to do it. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Now, I did not discuss any of the details about how we help to salvage Skylab. Now, I can do that. I didn't know how far to go into that. And this might be something, if you want to pigtail it on, it could be spliced in later. But what do you think, Bob? I did not address any of the details of how we help to salvage, Skylab. We evaluated all kinds of techniques. We had cameras, NASA cameras, and some DoD cameras that had captured the picture of how we had a strap that was restraining the deployment of that solar panel casing. So we took that picture, and then we started working to. We knew the material because that was the meteoroid shield that had it hung. So we knew what the material was, and we wanted to be able to go up with different techniques of how to try to shear that beam. We were constrained about the tools that we could develop because they had to fit inside the capsule that the flight crew went up in, and so then they had to be able to assemble them themselves and reach out, and we ended up basically with one of these tree limb limb trimmers, I guess, where you can pull a rope.
With a lever, yes.
Yeah, it's got a lever arm on it out there, and you get a little mechanical advantage. And so that's what we ended up with, but we changed the jaws to where it would cut through that material. And we put a not only all of the hardware simulated in the tank for that mission, we also brought up a real capsule from Houston, flew it in here, put it under the tank, in the underwater in the tank, because we thought the flight crew might have to stand in the hatch of that capsule, and one would hold the other, so they'd be the constraint. One would be held in, of course, by strap, safety belt. He would bear hug the feet of the other one that was standing up, trying to lasso. So I don't know whether any of that might be in it. We also had to work the handrails to go out and change out some of the film and the canisters on ATM, the Apollo telescope mount. I didn't go into any of that, and I don't know whether you want to or not.
It's your fault. We're trying to capture everything that you want to put into it.
Would you like to get that on the record? If you would, we can do it.
Well, yes and no.
Oh, you're having difficulty. Okay.
Okay, well, you want to look at your difficulty?
The thing doesn't seem to want to stop.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Well, did we get this conversation just now? Well, then we've got it. We'll just do some editing then.
a lot of our hardware went to the Space and Rocket Center, and I did mention that we were on the tour group, tour route for Space and Rocket Center.
Yeah.
And we ran over 1 million people a year through that out there.
Are we still on? Okay, well, I think we caught your description of some of that, and we can edit that into it already. Is that true, Bob?
I don't know.
Don't know yet. All right. Well, maybe we should reschedule you if we need to.
Well, and I'll be glad to do that.
Okay.
We had.
For whatever reason, it is not functional.
I did not mention that either that we put George Mueller, you remember him?
Yeah, sure.
So we put him in a pressure suit, put him in the tank. He wanted to experience it firsthand.
Yeah.
So we did that.
Sure.
So it got a lot of visibility. Let's see, it seemed like there was one other thing that. Let me get back my notes and see if there was anything else, because I just
We'll take that downstairs.
made 2 or 3 notes. Whenever Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, after they had been to the surface of the moon, and they came back and went on a worldwide tour and went through Russia. And so while they were in Russia, they made the offer to the cosmonauts, why don't you come to the United States, and we'll be glad to show you around our NASA facilities. And they did. And